So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Fenton, and I'm the coordinator of the Humanitarian Practice Network, which is hosted by the Humanitarian Policy Group here at ODI. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this public event, the title of which is Transition in Yemen, What Role for Humanitarian Action? And we're here to launch the 61st issue of the Humanitarian Exchange on the humanitarian situation in the Yemen, copies of which you'll find on your seats. And for those of you watching online, I think we have about 100 people who have signed up to join us today online. You can find the magazine online too. As you know, Yemen is one of the few Arab Spring countries which probably still holds the promise of political change. Yet, as the infographic that you will have found on your seats with your issue of the exchange demonstrates, it's the poorest country in the Middle East, with 50% of the population living below the poverty line, and about 14.7 million people, which is over half the population, in need of humanitarian assistance. It's also affected by an intricate web of armed conflicts and hosts several hundred thousand mixed migrants from the Horn of Africa. And humanitarian agencies in Yemen face obstacles on all fronts: insecurity and attacks on aid workers, limitations on access to people in need, and the politicization of donor objectives amidst widespread poverty, endemic food insecurity, and rapidly declining water resources. So the ongoing political transition in the Yemen is seeking to resolve the major sources of the conflicts. But what does the political process mean for principled humanitarian organizations? How can aid agencies best navigate competing needs and demands for humanitarian and development assistance while still avoiding violence and the sorts of attacks that are increasingly aimed at aid workers? So today we're going to be discussing some of these issues, as well as others, with our distinguished panel that we have here. We're going to look at the challenges facing aid agencies and hear from our panel different perspectives on some of the overlapping political, developmental, and humanitarian crises in Yemen, and how these are or could be better addressed. So before I introduce the panel, I'd just like to remind you to hold your thoughts and questions until we open the floor for discussion in a little while, in about 45 minutes, and also to please put your phones on silent. We encourage you to tweet, but if you could just put your phones on silent, that would be helpful. And the hashtag is Yemen Crisis, which I think is up on the screen. So let me introduce the panel now. To my immediate left is Trond Jensen. He's the head of office for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, in Yemen. And prior to taking up his current post, Trond has held a range of high-ranking roles in humanitarian response, including deputy head of office for OCHA Sudan, country director in Ethiopia with Save the Children, and deputy chief of the humanitarian coordination section for the UN mission in Liberia, UNMIL. I'm not going to go in order here. So next to Mikkel here, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, is Helen McElhinney, and she's the humanitarian advisor with the UK's Department for International Development, or DFID, in Yemen, and has been in this post since late 2012. And Helen oversaw the establishment of DFID's current humanitarian portfolio, including the first widespread move to multi-year humanitarian financing, which he's going to talk a little bit about later. And Helen has a background of working on humanitarian programming and policy in a number of fragile and conflict-affected states, and will shortly be taking up a post working on DFID's new humanitarian policy. And Mikhail Newman, who is on my immediate right, is the director of studies at CRASH at MSF in Paris. He joined MSF in 1999, alternating between missions in the field to the Balkans, the Caucasus, and West Africa, and positions at MSF headquarters in New York and Paris, where you must have got two very different perspectives. From 2008 to 2010, he served on the board of directors of the French and US sections of MSF, and he's the co-author of a book that I'm sure many of you have read called Humanitarian Negotiations Revealed, the MSF Experience. And then on my far right is Stephen Zick, who is a research fellow with HPG here at ODI, and he's also the co-editor of this issue of the of the exchange. And in addition to working with and consulting for numerous UN agencies, NGOs, and donors across the Middle East and Central Asia, Steve was previously a research fellow with the University of York's Post-War Reconstruction and Development Unit and lead analyst at the NATO Fusion Center. And then last but not least, on my far left, is Salim Haddad. And Salim is a conflict advisor for the Middle East and North Africa program at Safer World. And Salim, among other things, previously he led a 3-year research project at MSF on how the humanitarian landscape has been affected by the global war on terror, including 2 short-term field missions in Yemen in 2008 and 2009. So I think you'll agree that we have an interesting group of panelists here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say.